Now that we have our workspace set up, we're going to go through and make our first pattern. I'm going to show you how you can create patterns using simple shapes or lines. We're only working in black and white. We're starting off working simple. You want to pay close attention in this video because I'm going to navigate between these two layers, turning the visibility of layers on and off, and you have to, as a designer working in Illustrator, be aware of the layer you're working on and what visibility and locked mean. So we're going to do that as we work. I want you to pay attention when we do it. It's going to be a little confusing at first, but pay close attention. All right, so I want to be on pattern elements. All right, I want pattern elements active. We're going to draw different shapes on this artboard that we are then going to experiment with on this other layer. So how does that look? I'm going to get rid of the stroke. I don't want a stroke. Well, before I get rid of the stroke, I'm going to swap it so my fill's black. And then I'm going to redline my stroke so it doesn't exist and have a black fill. Under my shape tool, I'm going to come under. I can pull this off because we might experiment with shapes. So I'm pulling that off, move it into my empty work area up there. I'm going to start with an ellipse and I'm just going to click, and I'll start with 15, tab 15, click OK. I can click off and you can see I have this small dot. If I click on it, bounding box around it means it's active. Another thing you might want to know is, why is it red? Because my layer is red. This layer is red. If I click away from the words in the empty space and double click, I can make a layer any color I want. By default, this one's red. Why is this little arrow here? That means there's something on this layer. It's not empty. So if I toggle that, it's going to open it up. And you can see right here it says ellipse. And this little square means indicate selected art. That means that object's selected. And it's a circle, right? Or an ellipse. I can close that up. I just want you to know, start thinking about layers. How do they work? What's on them? Now we're going to come down to pattern experiments. And I'm going to turn this off for a second so we don't see it. I want to come to the rectangle tool. I want the fill to be white. So I'm going to hit default. Gives me a white fill. You can hit D, or you can click on that. And no stroke. The white fill I want to start in the upper left hand corner of my artboard, and I'm going to drag to the lower right hand corner. It's going to give me a 1920 by 1080 rectangle that's white. You're thinking, well, it was already white. Why are we drawing a white rectangle? Remember that Illustrator does not consider the background color of the artboard to be white. It considers it to be paper. Most paper is white, but it considers it to be paper. So if you want to change the background of your artboard or whatever you're drawing in Illustrator, you need to draw a shape the size of the artboard and make it that color. I just happen to make this one white because that's what our experiment needs. And if you look, I open that up, I have a rectangle. All right, turn the visibility off for a minute, turn this one back on. With my selection tool, V key, I want to select that element, and it's an object. We drew it on the artboard. It's something we created. It's an object, and we were talking about making patterns. So object, pattern, and make. Don't worry about this. This is just saying new pattern has been added to the swatches panel, which is right here in the upper right. You can see it. I'm going to turn this off. Don't show again. And click OK. And I'm going to rename my pattern. New pattern doesn't tell us anything. We're working smart. We're working intelligently. We want to manage our files. So let's call this 15 pixel dot. These other settings in this pattern options menu we're going to experiment with. The one that we don't want though is dim copies to be clicked. And we don't want this panel to be floating over over our artboard, it's going to get in the way. So I'm going to dock it over here below swatches. Right? So I'm going to drag it, and I'm going to wait for that blue line right in between the two panels. Not there where it's outlining a panel set. Right in between it's a line. I'm going to let go. You don't need this permanently over in your workspace, so don't resave it. We just need it while we're working on these pattern missions, okay? Now, you can see it's created this pattern. And you can see it's right there. And I can click on Done to save it. I want to turn the pattern elements layer off. I want to turn on the visibility of pattern experiments. I want to select that rectangle which is filled with white. Make sure my fill is selected, not the stroke, but the fill. Come over to swatches, click on the pattern. So with a simple 15 pixel ellipse, not changing any of the settings except to turn off dimming, I have a texture, I have a pattern. That simple. What I want you to do is I want you to experiment. And I'm going to go through one more just so you can see the workflow again. I want you to experiment with just shapes and lines, black and white, and see what the different options of that panel does. So I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to turn my pattern elements back on. What if I draw a square? And I want to make sure that I'm on my pattern elements layer, it's active and it's visible. I want my fill not to be that pattern, but to be black. I'm going to click, and I want a 20 by 20 pixel rectangle. I can click off the selection tool, and you can see I have a 20 by 20 pixel rectangle. I want it selected again so we can make our pattern. Remember, object, pattern, make. Our pattern panel's over here. Let's call this 20 pixel square. Now let's experiment from here. What happens if I change grid? Right? Experiment. We'll do brick by row. And right now they're kind of overlapping each other. So what if I changed the width to 40 and 40? Now you'll see those spread out, and because it's brick by brick, it's offset. I can even adjust the number of copies. I could say 3 by 5, for example, and then I can click on Done. So just from this shape, what happens? Let's turn the visibility off. Let's turn the pattern experiments layer on. We're going to select it with our selection tool, and let's see what happens. Now it's giving us some cool trippy illusion. I don't know about you, but I look at that, my eyes are freaking out like it's a weird look. But that's what I want you to do. I want you to experiment. Different shapes, try those different settings, figure out how it works. How many experiments? Well, I don't want to give you a definite answer, but work on it a period, a half a period. Make 20. Well, maybe not 20. Do 10, something like that. See how it works. Then in the next set, I'm going to show you some more specific settings and stuff you can do to really make some cool patterns.